Excellent, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome for the briefing event for two competitions, two for the price of one today, for the Commercialising Quantum ISCF competitions, the Feasibility Studies and the large CR&D projects. My name is Chris Jones. I'm the Deputy Director for the ISCF Challenge. And that's my colleague Roger McKinley, who's the Challenge Director. I've got a couple of hygiene announcements, so I'll have to put my glasses on to read them. So first of all, predictably, about all fire alarm activations. Should it be necessary to evacuate the building, you should assemble in the lounge area, where you'll be escorted to the evacuation point at Wesley's Chapel. You all have a security pass, so make sure you use it, you keep it about your person, and you use it to swipe in and out of the building. So that's all the announcements I've got. So as I introduced me and Roger, Simon is the innovation lead. Most of you will probably know Simon pretty well. So we're the core of the ISCF delivery team. Agenda today. Roger is going to talk about the quantum in the UK and really focusing on the National Quantum Technologies Programme and where ISCF sits in it. We're kind of assuming that you all know a bit about quantum, so we're not going to do introduction to quantum slides. We assume you're here because you know at least a little bit about the area. I'm going to talk about the competition brief. We ran a whole series of events early on in the summer, which we kind of call cultivation events. Most of the detail is the same, but there are a few kind of tweaks. So as always, I'll try and point those out to you, but say always refer to the most recent slides and not the previous ones. We'll have a break and a chance to have a coffee. Melissa and Lydia, I think it might be Julie, is going to be here as well. We're going to be talking about the competition process and the application process. That's particularly important, so please do wait for that, because anything between 20 and 30% of the project applications we receive, we have to rule as ineligible because of a minor problem with the paperwork. So do make sure that you listen to that part of the presentation. We've got Q&A, we've got lunch. And also, if any of you want to have a one-to-one conversation with Simon and I this afternoon, we have I think 3 or 4 slots available to talk to us in a bit more detail. And that's the agenda for today. Okay, Roger. Let me just check my details.
So good morning, everyone. And a lot of what I'm going to say probably hasn't changed for those of you who've kept tabs for the programme. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's because our lords and masters are worrying about other things and not tweaking the way they normally tweak. But no, we're very much running in step with those of you at the cultivation events. And you remember, of course, we covered our slides with caveats then and said it may change. Well, indeed, we're now in the process of launching competitions, and the overall look and feel of the programme is very much as we said. We have got some stuff to update you on, but let me just set the context for the competition itself. Even though the branding here is industrial strategy, of course, we always go back to the fact that we have a national quantum technologies program, which has been very, very successful, been running for 5 years. And if you add what we've spent so far to what we plan to do, it comes out to a 1 billion program, and it's very difficult to have a program like this stay on track so excellently. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't going to be wobbles in the future, but it has been a concerted effort working across government to run our investments from the likes of EPSRC and some of the other government departments such as DSTL in step with what wasn't around at the start of the programme, but now is, of course, which is the industrial strategy. So a great exercise in coordination. Just to remind you what's happened so far in phase 1, and phase 1 technically comes to an end on the end of November, and then we're into phase 2. And the hubs, you'll be glad to know, are all funded with new programs of work. So the landscape doesn't change enormously, but the balance does. So we set up 4 hubs: imaging in Glasgow, computing in Oxford, comms in York, and sensing in Birmingham. And those hubs did more than if you like, focus for research. They made relationships, and that's going to be a theme today, they made relationships with about 100 companies. So compared to some of the other challenges, we hit the ground running in the sense that I think we have very, very mature relationship with both large companies who might be potential users of quantum technology and the smaller technology companies, spin-outs and SMEs who are developing the technology. We are absolutely convinced this is the case because we keep getting the signals, but it's not just about technology, it's also about training and skills. We ran centres for doctoral training as part of phase 1, and those and other training initiatives will continue in phase 2. Possibly what we've got to still find is a way of addressing more of the technician skills, not so much the doctoral skills. Those in the fabrication business say that every machine not only costs $1.5 million, but it has to have standing next to it someone who's been doing that job for about 18 months. And programs we're talking about are making things, and they all involve fabrication. So training skills remains key. We funded the National Physical Labs Quantum Metrology Institute. DSTL put in significant funding both on studentships but also on sensing, particularly sensing for navigation and time. And in fact, some of their thinking's matured now to what many of you will know is termed the AltNav program, looking at non-GNSS solutions to navigation, in which quantum technologies will play a role. We ran Innovate UK competitions, that slice shown as UKRI. We ran those as part of an emerging and enabling technology, and I think, if I remember correctly, a dedicated quantum call. And those programs are just coming to an end now. But that was significant activity with, of course, encouraging some industry investment. And the most important thing when you get back to 12 o'clock on the diagram is the science never stops. So we are not talking about a technology which is climbing up TRLs. We're talking about some fairly mature bits, but I think in 30 years' time still we'll be investing in the underlying science. That is a different story from today. Today is very much ISCF and industry focused. We had a pioneer program, if you remember. It seems not long ago, and indeed it is not long ago. A year ago, we were just, I think, closing the competition and beginning to look at those. We limited its scope to not include computing. It was a 20 million fund available, and it was oversubscribed, and it achieved its goal almost the day the competition closed because we were trying to gauge industry interest, and indeed it was high. And now we have with that 20 million of funding, about 10 million of private funding. So we've got a portfolio with 4 programs totaling 30 million underway at the moment. Simon's just taken through the second quarter review, and we're very pleased with the progress on all 4 programs. And there they are, a miniature atomic clock, a gravity sensing for survey, and then 2 QKD, two quantum key distributions. And we of course, now are broadening the scope to include computing. But we've been delighted with all 4 of those programs. There are some disappointments. I personally would have liked to have seen a sensing for navigation program in there. It wasn't a question of quality alone, of course. It was a competitive program. We were oversubscribed, as I've mentioned. Here's a really important slide, but not to look at the details, just lap up the ambiance, if you like. That is one consortium on Wave 2. It's the AquaSEC consortium led by Toshiba Research Limited. It's quantum key distribution down fiber, and it has 16 partners. You know, our definition of a partner is a grant recipient, and then we have a coordinating lead partner who puts in place the collaboration agreement between the partners. One very, very trite way of looking at this is all of that is really great work. What we do is we use public money to pay for the collaboration because it is more difficult than doing something on your own. But of course, the scale of what you can achieve with a collaborating group like that is much greater. So that really is our focus in spending ISCF money. Force for collaboration, not in a heavy-handed way, but encourage for collaboration, because some of these teams are almost forming bits of supply chain. And we are expecting some of the relationships made in Wave 2 to show up again in terms of consortia forming for Wave 3. Just a quick reminder then, we back at the budget time just under a year ago, we announced 70 million. We actually had a plan for 153 million when it was approved, and indeed that was given the green light a few months ago, contingent on 205 million of industry investment. That is not a kind of smokestack industry sector deal where we have promises from companies to put in 205 million, because some of the companies we want to make those promises don't exist yet. So we have built our case on attracting investment into the quantum sector, and I'm convinced that 205 million figure is low. And we have some other instruments. We launched one a week ago, the Investment Accelerator, to bring money in to form the companies who are then going to be able to invest in this business. So slightly different from some of our other challenges. So what next? We continue with the hubs. We have an animal called the National Quantum Computing Centre. There was a town meeting for that a few weeks ago. Some of you may have been at it. That is our first investment in facilities for many reasons. One being it's a sovereign capability, and we know that in the future we will want to be able to run programs in a computing centre where we're in control of what happens to the IP and who's in the room. That program is underway. And then the ISCF funding is a large slice of what happens next, but so again, even larger is the industry contributions to that. So you've got the hang of it. We want to enable industry money coming in to the business, but it doesn't mean we're only talking to large companies with this briefing, because of course you saw the diversity of who's actually included in the consortia in Wave 2. We still have an industrial strategy. We haven't seen this change yet. And just to remember, this money and the justification for it and the business case we made is really, there are several metrics, but the headline one for the ISCF was to get the UK over the next 5 years up to 2.4% of GDP being invested in R&D, which is why it's so important that the activities we do help to bring this about and encourage industry investment. And that really puts us slightly higher up the league then, in that table, if you like, compared to our near neighbours and those we cooperate closely with, the US, France and Canada. But that is perceived to be a way of growing our economy based on what we're good at. And what we're good at is in the room now. We're good at, we've got outstanding academic excellence. We've got a climate in which people want to form companies. And of course, what we want to do is make sure that the nature of the knowledge and the skills and the know-how is such to replay the airline expression. When you're coming into Los Angeles and British Airways say, we know you have a choice of airlines, thank you for using us. We want large companies who are choosing where to put their centre of excellence in quantum technologies. We want to be able to say, we know you have a choice of any country in the world to do this. Thank you for choosing us. The industrial strategy, 4 major grand challenges, as we call them. We come under AI and data economy. We've got to live somewhere. And the other one's future mobility, clean growth, and the ageing society. Interesting, that's the way the portfolio is broken up. I think actually, as that's emerged, we've actually seen those grand challenges referred to less, because of course within UKRI, we are just now thinking much more in terms of waves. So we're one of the significant Wave 3 programs now, which has been announced in the past few months. So we're looking at delivering science, and which the business needs to transform existing industries and create new ones. We're looking at measuring the impact of that, and one of the things which we will come on to is we actually want to know, let's be blunt on the industry side, we want to know if you overspend as a result of committing to our projects, or have to invest in other things, as we are wanting to measure the impact running these programs has had. We don't just want to know how you're spending the grant. So we're really, really keen over the next, over the life of the program to work out exactly what effect this investment is having. We've got 3 events like this on CR&D, 3 waves of it in the program, and we will be taking note of how each wave goes and tweaking what we do the next time, just to maximize the impact of what we're achieving. Industry-led is the big message then. These consortium are industry-led. So we're looking at increased investment in R&D, we can measure that, increased multi and interdisciplinary research, and collaboration between the whole spectrum of companies, from those which don't even exist yet to those who are looking at using quantum technology to serve global markets, large services. Think of companies like BT and BP, for example. And there's where we land in the grand order of things, just coming towards the end of the Wave 3 negotiations and the start of delivery. And of course, competitions is the first stage in that delivery. A few notable challenges in Wave 1. The Faraday battery challenge is probably one of the best known, 246 million challenge. Not many in Wave 1 as big as our 153 million, so we're well up the league. Wave 2, we were there as a 20 million program with some other big ones around precision medicine, for example, and the transforming construction, which for some reason never appears to have a picture on these slides. I haven't worked that out. You'd have thought someone in a yellow hat was the easiest picture to find, but never mind. And that's a summary of Wave 3. So this was the big kickoff for us. I rather unfairly say, remember her, when I put up this slide, but it does seem a long time ago. And this is where at London Tech Week, our 150 million was announced. And that's for Vision growing UK's leadership. So I haven't mentioned the international scene at the moment, but there is an international scene in terms of investment and in terms of companies taking interest in quantum. And obviously our aim is to keep the UK, I think, in its rightful position, given the quality of academic excellence we have and the ability we have to start great companies. I would put it that way around. I'm not going to say the UK is no good at turning these into business, because that's just not true. We've got to capitalize on the fact that we can still attract the best people in the world to this country, and we've got to turn that into economic benefit. We don't call it commercialization. We tend to call it industrialization now, but that's at every opportunity and every slide. We're going to remind you that really we're wanting industry to step up, to take a lead, because that's the rules of the ISCF. And we've got 4 delivery strands. So the one we're talking about today, the 2 we're talking about today, CR&D, collaborative R&D and feasibility studies, you probably know well. If not, you will by the end of today. There are 2 others. The investment accelerator, IA, we kicked off a week ago. And that is where we're going to find some VC partners to help us spend 12 million. We co-invest with them in the first round on the condition that they go on and run another 3 rounds. So that 12 million will turn into 48 of investment through VCs. And we're really hoping that is going to help start up some of the new companies who are going to be key in this program as it unfolds. And then we have one other category called technology projects. These we're still working on. We haven't launched the competition for these yet. They're likely to be larger projects than a typical CR&D, and will involve a significant industry contribution. There's many ways of putting this, but one is to say we want to join in some of the large investment plans industry is beginning to have, and that might actually be more focused towards facilities or innovation centres, but we're still formulating our plan on that. We felt that though it's tried and tested, we needed a bit more than the normal CR&D and feasibility approach in order to achieve our objectives. So, in directives, here's the sort of things we will see coming out of it. Increased sales of quantum products, increased investment I've mentioned, and this increased churn between academia and business as these relationships mature into, if you like, people talking to each other, to people doing good business together. So the match funding, it's an ambitious task, and just remember that we will be watching all of the applications to actually have the fact that we are looking for significant industry contribution in mind. We haven't tinkered with the intervention rates. Okay, they still are as they all are. That's state aid rules in terms of how much we can fund, or in terms of, more strictly speaking, how much of the eligible costs we can offer an offset against, depending on the size of the company. That doesn't mean actually that an industry, one of the company players might want to put in more. But it's worth bearing in mind that absolutely fundamentally we have some targets to achieve at the end of the programme, and this is a significant slice of our 150 million we'll be committing to. So those are the 4 delivery strands. CR&D then, we've got 83 million over 3 rounds, industry-led, delivering new quantum products and services with a focus on the end user. In wave 2, we actually said we wanted to see a user involved in the consortium. I think we've backed off on that slightly, because we do recognise that in a supply chain we're going to have some mature components coming out of this. So it may not be a user as in terms of a user in the field, but it better be a potential customer for what's actually being developed. So we want no vagueness about, if you like, the commercial viability. So if you've got a stunning idea for a product, we need some evidence that the sort of company or the sort of organisation you might sell it to is involved in your consortium. That gives us a high level of confidence that in fact we're well on the way for our investment being able to grow and show benefits. We, in total, by the way, we've got 4 projects running at the moment, but we're expecting when we finish these rounds to have probably about 30 significant products running. Simon, as the innovation lead, is not going to be running all of those. We are growing the team at the moment. But in 2 years' time, 2.5 years' time, there'll be significant program activity. We hope very well spread across those challenge areas of sensing, computing and communications. Now, it's worth saying that we are under no obligation. We're going to play fair, but we're under no obligation just to press the button on a competition, line up the scores at the end and pick the top 4 or whatever. It is going to be a portfolio. We always say it's a portfolio approach. We are going to have to behave strategically in order to meet our objectives. So my hope is that we end up with projects well spread in a strategic way across each of those areas. Feasibility studies, 12 million over 2 rounds, so another one to go after this. An SME to lead or as a partner, and these are shorter projects, typically less than 500k over 18 months. The actual details of this in a more formal way, Chris will cover when we come to talk about the competition. And the technology projects, as I've mentioned, 46 million, so a significant amount to spend, and the exact the size of these typical sort of up to 10 million projects and how we go about running those competitions, we are still looking at the moment, but we don't want to fund buildings. I think a really good rule of thumb on all of this activity is we want to fund collaborative projects, the outcome of which is the outcome. We don't want to pay for someone's building because they've disguised it as a collaborative project, all right? So work and useful outcomes is what we want. It may well be that in some of the projects we fund, part of the outcome are some facilities appearing. But it's a work programme with deliverables which we're really after. And the investment accelerator I've mentioned already. So that's the summary of it. 4 streams totaling 153 million, which in the next few years, our rate of spend, remember, our rate of spend is really linked to how quickly and how efficiently the winners invoice us for the eligible costs. But that will be probably reaching its peak, I'd think, probably in about 3 years' time. And there's a programme set out in a form just to prove that occasionally we do plan things. But there you go, the top line is the 3 waves of CR&D. So you see we're kicking off all 3 within the next 18 months. And feasibility studies in 2 waves, the technology phase running slightly behind, and the investment accelerator, which is really just 1 wave, but that's a first competition to pick our partners. There then will be waves of investment, which we jointly make between our investment partners and ourselves. So 83 million of CR&D, 12 of feasibility studies, 46 of our large programs, and 12 of investment accelerator phased as such. And so we've got quite a busy time over the next 3 or 4 years where you see that spend peaking. But a predominantly CR&D program. No, sorry, the biggest slice is CR&D. The biggest slice is CR&D, 54%. So obviously that with the feasibility studies, almost 2/3 of what we'll be spending, which is why today is so important. I think I've pretty well covered that. It shows some of the dates in there, which when we first waved them at you were, of course, in a slightly fainter font, but they have proven to be the case. The only one now, TBD, being the technology projects. And over to Chris for something much more relevant, if you like, to those top 2 categories, CR&D and F&S. Chris, where are you?
I'm here.
Questions. Are we going to take them now or at the end? What do you suggest?
Let's take them at the end of this section.
Yeah,
and
okay.
then we've got a slot so we can, because some of the questions that they might have on, I might answer in my brief. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the competition brief for both the CR&D and the feasibility studies. There are some common themes between the 2, so what I'm going to do is start off by what's common, then I'm going to go through the 2. You will see quite a lot of duplication, perhaps between Roger's slides, my slides, and the slides this afternoon. That's because we all probably have different things we want to say about the different elements. First of all, I would recommend all of you to refer to not these slides, but to the brief that's on the website. Occasionally, that brief does change for one reason or another, so do check it occasionally, certainly before you actually press send, to make sure that there hasn't been. You can tell when it's updated, so if it hasn't been updated, that's fine. But it's just always worth having a look. Technical scope. Okay, so let's start off what's common between the 2 competitions. Much of this will be familiar to you from previous presentations or previous competitions. So the way ISCF works is you really have to identify industrial challenges. So the best way to put it is a question and answer approach. So that what are the technical challenges which are limiting commercialisation, industrialisation and business investment in quantum in the UK. It's a tricky game to try and unpick out what are real industrial challenges. So in the very limited amount of space we've had, we've really compressed the technical challenges into 3 main application areas. So the way it felt to us when we're designing this is these are 3 challenges which are common to many industries. So quantum isn't a sector. It's not an industry itself now. It will apply and transform many different industrial sectors. So what we're looking for is the common challenges across industry that we think quantum not only could, but has some credible reasons as to why it might be the technical solution to these areas. Very briefly, when I keep saying very briefly, when we're designing these competition briefs, we have very limited amount of space in order to put there. So if things look like they're very, very top line, that's because we're always counting our number of letters and words when we're doing these things. And that's one of the things we're here today, is to try and unpack some of that. So the first of these 3 challenges, connectivity. Really that's code for data and storage in flight. So communication, safety, security. Situation awareness, which I guess is a very broad way to talk about sensing in its broadest senses. So there's lots of different areas of sensing which will apply to lots of different areas of application. Obviously, some areas are particularly prominent. For example, autonomous systems. Autonomous systems are bristle with sensor technologies, and we're aware that some of the visions, actually some of the things that people are saying they are going to deliver into the marketplace require sensors with the sensitivity and the robustness that we simply don't have at the moment. And finally, computing. So computing was out of scope in our previous competition. It's in scope now. So the way we kind of put it is transformational computation for currently intractable problems. So you'll hear me say this a number of times, but we want to fund a portfolio of projects at different areas. So we are looking to fund a broad range of technologies. Kind of the way it always looks to us is you see a set of technical advances on the left-hand side, a set of application areas on the right-hand side, and one of our jobs is to try and fill that supply chain and technology chain in as much as possible with UK-based solutions. So that's broadly how the whole landscape looks to us. And finally, the projects must exploit second-generation quantum techniques. Now, this is where my slide goes into gross simplicity, since I'm aware that probably there are whole conferences about what the definition of second generation is. But in fact, we've had to put it down to a single line, which is a generation or coherent control and manipulation of quantum states resulting in superposition and entanglement. We also did single photon generation detection and quantum computing are in scope. So let's just talk about this a little bit more. So the aim of our competition is to promote the industrialization and commercialization of second generation quantum technology in the UK. So if your project doesn't do that, so for example, we have had people come to us with projects to show that with some clever silicon architecture, you don't actually need a quantum computer at all. Well, that's great, absolutely great, but it doesn't help us very much because we're really wanting to promote and engineer quantum solutions to some of these areas. I think the area that's causing us most discussions at the moment are the single photon generation and detection, and I think we'd have to talk to you on a case-by-case basis, and that is something I'd really scope, which is why the customer support line is on this slide very prominently. Many of these project examples, we really have to talk through with you because there are subtleties, and we don't want you to try and sneak under the scope wire and find that actually you don't quite make it. So talk to us and talk to Simon and I in particular about whether or not your projects actually fit this. So for example, in single photon generation and detection, if the whole purpose of your project is to simply make something which exists a bit more sensitive by going from multiple photons to single photon, that's probably not in scope. If, however, you're looking at things like time of flight and you're looking at sort of really a paradigm shifting way of sensing, which isn't significantly possible at the moment, but is possible using single photon, and that kind of would get in scope. And there are many examples of that, particularly in the kind of computing area too. I'll say this multiple times. If you've got doubt about scope, I'll warn you in advance, we'll ask you to produce a couple of paragraphs or a one-page description, non-confidential description of your project. We'll ask you in advance, we'll ask you when you call us, so get it ready now, because that allows us to look at the particulars of your project and actually kind of look whether or not it's in scope or not, and give you the reassurance that you need. Okay, so we are particular specific themes. When you write these scope, you really identify particular things you're interested in. This isn't the fact that these will be rated higher than everything else. It's partly to remind people that particular things are in scope, and that fact that there are particular elements of application which are particularly attractive to us. So we've talked about consortia which span the supply chain. So we're interested in a complete economic chain in the UK if possible. We're interested on focus on the UK return from quantum technology research by the academic base. We're aware that many of you, if you're from industry, will have context with the academic base. It's still something that we still have a thriving academic base in the UK, and we're looking to build broader and deeper connections between academia and industry. I think I'll talk about it again in a minute. Roger's always mentioned that new private sector investment is a really big deal right across ISCF Wave 3. I'll talk about that in a second. And finally, the final point is really just to remind people that quantum computing is in scope in terms of this competition, which it wasn't in the last. So, and that's the broadest sense. So we talk about hardware components, algorithms and software. So the big difference, I think, between what we said last time and what we said now is the first competition round was focused on devices, i.e. products, and now we're interested in products and services. So I think that's the kind of language movement in the last year or so. Eligibility, we'll go into a bit more detail a bit later about that, but the key point is to be eligible for funding, you must be a UK-based. We can talk a bit probably about what the phrase UK-based really means, and it kind of really means having a significant footprint in the UK that is capable of exploiting that technology in the UK. I'll refer to that a bit later on. Also be academic, charity, public sector, but we really remember that everything is business-led. The lead applicants need to be a business. You need to involve an SME in your consortium, either as a lead or a collaborator, carry out your project work in the UK. We do, in exceptional circumstances, we understand that sometimes there might not be a particular product or service available outside the UK. If that's the case, kind of talk to us about that, but we don't expect that to be a significant part of any programs. You need to, if it's a CR&D project, you need to collaborate with others, and you intend to exploit the results from the UK. Again, I talked about that a bit later, but exploiting kind of in the UK, and we say from the UK, means sometimes your customers may not be in the UK, but we expect that the economic value of that exploitation to be anchored in the UK. Collaborate with others if it's a CR&D project, and the lead organisation must be a business and claim funding through this competition. I'll talk about RTOs in a second, but just to be clear, we now don't allow organisations to participate in collaborations and not necessarily take funding. That's particularly the case really when we see it in very large organisations who really want to be a part of a programme, but quite honestly, the paperwork involved of taking grant is probably quite significant for them. So we do allow that to happen. And it's quite attractive to some organisations of some kind. But the lead organisation must be a business and claim funding through the competition. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but as Roger said before, for most of you who are familiar with our competitions, we don't pay for businesses 100% of your eligible costs. We pay a range depending on the maturity of the project and also the size of the business. I'm sure that our competition colleagues will talk about this a little bit later, but just as an introduction, broadly speaking, we pay you a proportion of what you evidence to us that you've spent. So we don't pay in advance, we pay in arrears. So bluntly, if you tell us that you've spent £10,000 in eligible costs and you're a micro SME, then we'll pay you 70% of what you claim from us. But again, I think we'll dwell on the economics much later. So I guess the purpose of this slide is to say that we're wanting to manage a portfolio here. For those of you who are very familiar with Innovate UK competitions, you know at the end in our assessment process, competitions end up with a score, and traditionally we've pretty much gone down the line until we get into either the money runs out or we get to a level which we consider to be unfundable in terms of quality. Just to give you a heads up, we might not do that in this competition. We might well decide that there are things which are overrepresented. There might be areas we particularly want to see. There might be projects which we do some things, such as produce industrial investment, that are particularly attractive to us. So just to kind of give you a heads up, we won't necessarily go down the line. So we are interested in consortium which bring a variety of partners. We've also said we're looking for projects which deliver prototypes, can meet the specifications of the end user. As Roger said, when we talked about the original competition, we pretty much said you had to have an end user in the consortia to tell the people in the supply chain what the specifications of the end product ought to be. I mean, the example I'm saying is if the end user needs something the size of a shoebox and the product is the size of a fridge freezer, and that's probably not going to work. I think we've relented on that a little bit, but we still expect you to understand what is going to be acceptable to your users. If you don't have them part of your consortium, do talk to them and evidence what you've talked to and evidence those conversations. But we want you to produce things which are going to have a marketplace for it. And so I think that's something for you to really think about and get you out there talking to end users. We will kind of decide when we allocate funding, we're looking for a diversity of technology challenges. Now, that doesn't mean we won't fund different projects which actually are aimed at delivering the same product or service. I think we're unlikely to fund a whole group of projects using exactly the same technology to do the same kind of service. But we are looking for a variety of different paradigms. And actually, when we did our first Wave 2 program, I think we had 15 applications, I think only 2 of which duplicated the actual end user. So we know there's a multiplicity of different products and services out there to these projects to target. Okay, so we're going to talk about CR&D in particular now, because CR&D is a bigger project. Probably more of you will be interested in that. So the aim of this competition is to speed up the commercialisation. Now, what Roger said, he's kind of right. We've very much moved on now from talking about commercialisation to industrialisation. It's not reflected in the brief, but it is where our thinking is. So what that really means to you is we expect you to think about how your products and services might be scaled. So if the end product is a consultancy, which is only ever going to be a consultancy, we want to know how that's going to scale, because if it's only involving that, then it's never going to be an industrial solution. The commercialisation of quantum technology in the UK increased private investment. Your project must identify a clear market opportunity and an innovative project that exploits it. I'm not sure if I've got it anywhere else, but we often talk about innovation, and I'm not sure if it appears in the rest of my slides, but where I always put it is we're not called Product Development UK, we're called Innovate UK. So we expect your projects to be technically challenging and to have levels of technical risk in them. If you know exactly what you want to do, and if there's very little technical risk, then find another source of money, because we're really interested in funding innovative technical solutions. You need to demonstrate a commercial viable solution, provide evidence of performance. What we kind of really mean there is what are the metrics, or what would success look like? So if you've got a device or a service that's going to have a particular performance, we need to expect you to kind of really say what you think that is. And that's for 2 reasons. One, it allows us to benchmark your particular product or service, and it also kind of allows us to tell that you are really thinking about what the end use might be, and also you've spoken to people in the marketplace who've specified what that might be. We really want you to provide a roadmap of future exploitation. Let's be clear, we don't expect the end product of your project to be a CE marked device in a box ready to go, right? That would be lovely. It would be really lovely if you could do that. But we expect that's not always going to be the case. But we expect to see what your roadmap is. So, how is it going to be exploited? If there's a technical barrier that prevents your end product endpoint to getting to marketplace, be clear what it is and what your actual solution is. Who are you collaborating with? Who are you talking to? What are your dependencies in terms of getting that product to the marketplace? So some of the metrics, we have up to £27 million available. The project size we're expecting to see is £2 to £10 million of eligible cost. To be clear, that's the project size, not the grant size. The biggest mistake we see from applicants is they'll put in a project where the grant is 10 million and the project is probably 13 or 14 million. I know it seems obvious, but you would be astonished by the number of PhDs who get this wrong. So just bear that in mind. We said 18 to 36 months. The projects must start in terms of before June. I'll say a few things about that a little bit later, actually. Collaborative and must include at least one SME, and up to 30% of the eligible costs can be taken by research organisations. They need to be research industry-led. I'm going to say a little bit more about the RTOs in a second, but bluntly, they're focused on delivering user-defined quantum products, services and devices with confidence that a market and a UK secure supply chain exists. I think I've got a tiny thing on the bottom. In exceptional circumstances, we do allow RTOs. Remember, RTOs aren't universities. We allow RTOs to lead, typically when there's a large consortia and no one particular industry party is prepared to lead. If one of you wants to do that, you need to get our permission in advance. So just tell us if you want to do that, and we'll tell you if we think that's going to be permissible. Multiple applications. Any one business can only lead on one application, but you can be a partner on any number of applications. If an RTO is approved to lead, they must collaborate with more than two, and they can lead only once. If they're not the lead, then this applies to academics too. They can collaborate on any number of applications. Crucial key dates. So the competition's been open for a while now. We hope you've enjoyed your summer holidays, so we didn't want to drag you off your summer holidays, so which is why we've got the briefing today. The competition closes at 12 p.m. That is noon. Yes, we do get people who mistake 12 p.m. for midnight and noon on the 30th of October. Now, two things to say about that. Firstly, we do understand that the 30th of October is the day before another very important day. I'm not going to mention the B word, but I'm just saying that your business may well be quite busy the day before. And the other thing I'd say is please get your applications in as early as possible. I'll tell the story that I always tell. Last competition we had at midnight, because we always say, one of our sayings is, a watch competition never closes. So we never look all the time about what applications we got. But at midnight, I had one application. I thought, oh, okay, that's a bit kind of disappointing. We were expecting kind of a dozen or so. By 11 o'clock, I thought, right, okay, they'll all be in there. They'll all be in there. I had two applications. I thought, oh, I'm so dead. When I actually looked, there were 14 applications at the 100% filled in mark. They just hadn't scrolled down to submit. So with a brief flurry of phone calls, then we managed to convert those into the applications we had. But I did lose 2 pounds in weight and sweat over that period. So don't put me through it again. And there's a slide I think comps have got showing the fact that 70% of applications are happening on the 2 hours before application. So please don't do that to me. Invitation to interviews, I'll talk a little about that in a second. And the applications are noted out on the 17th of January. So for the CR&D, there's an awful lot of detail. Actually, I'm not going to duplicate it today, detail on the interview process. But I just will say a few things about the interview process. The interview process it really does separate the wheat from the chaff. And you kind of, when we interview you, we will ask questions about things which aren't necessarily in your application. So do prepare for it, because you need to get your act together. I'll say a little bit more about that a bit later. But if you haven't been to one of our interviews before, you do kind of need to get your act together. I mean, I think they're great, but I don't have to be. I'm sitting on the other side of the fence. But they are really good into testing out your project. So feasibility studies. So this is subtly different, but not very different. So the aim is to accelerate commercialisation, improve the private sector. I think that's roughly the same. It says the project must study a commercial opportunity. That kind of means we don't expect it to be a little bit perhaps as late stage as some of the CR&D projects. Quantify performance objectives. Again, that's our code for if it's a device, if it's a component, if it's something in supply chain where you don't have an end user, we do expect you to be clear what the performance of it is. If it's a laser which is going to fit into somebody else's box some way down the line, you might not actually be in contact with the person who's going to buy the end product, but you do need to be very clear what your performance targets are. Again, provide a roadmap of how it can be exploited, and again, exploit second-generation quantum techniques. So it's very similar, but subtly different. In feasibility studies, we have up to £6 million available. Project size has to be under 500k, that's eligible costs again. So I've just reminded you, project's not grant size, and up to 18 months in length. We do, when we ran our last, not the ISCF, but the last quantum competitions, we allowed market research projects to come in. Sometimes, if your business has a particular area of quantum that you might want to do some market research on, then we still allow. We've reduced that amount now to 50k. And by the way, if you're a market research company, you can't get it to then give the money to yourself. This is expecting again to be industry-led. and we're also not expecting you to simply want to duplicate what's out there. So if you want to do this, you really have to be clear what it is you want to know and why that information is out there. If it's just because you don't want to buy those expensive reports which are out there, which you always see the front page of but can never afford, that's not really a fair way to do this. If the information already exists, that's kind of not what we're expecting. You must include at least one SME, and in this case, we say up to 50% of research organisation participation. That's higher than 30% before. Let's be clear, you don't have to have 50% research participation. And in actual fact, you kind of might want to think about why you would need to have 50% participation, because one of our key examination metrics is going to be maximising the industry input into the project. So kind of, just think about it. But we do understand these are early stage projects. We do want people to collaborate with the academic community. So that's why we've increased that up to 50%. Again, industry-led. There's no interview stage this time, which is a shame for me because I always love seeing your projects. But we're not doing that. And again, this is focused on delivering user-defined quantum product services and devices, components or supply chain elements, with confidence that the market exists or will exist. So say they're generally earlier stage and higher risk. Any one business can lead up to 3 applications, but all applicants can partner in any number of applications. Just to be clear about the 3 applications, I've got a slide a bit later where I'm going to be very clear about what your capacity is, because if you lead 3 applications and you win 3 applications, then you just need to think whether or not you can really deliver 3 applications. So you might well decide in that process that you don't want to, but that's kind of up to you. Okay. Excuse me. This is a bit simpler. So the competition, again, is already open. We've got a briefing event today. It closes again on the 30th of October with the same caveat I said before. But because there's no interview stage, we'll hopefully by Christmas you can toast your success over your fine Christmas dinner. By the way, we always announce the successful applicants, but we don't announce the unsuccessful applicants. So we share your glory, but we hide your shame. So people will know. So we ask you for a public description of your project that will enter the public domain, and it will enter the public domain probably sooner than you think it will, but it will happen. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few general comments across the different projects, and also talk about some of the things which, from our experience of the Wave 2, what a successful project looks like. Okay, so first let's talk about, this is to reiterate what Roger said, identifying and delivering increased industry investment alongside and dependent ISCF funding is a crucial aspect of this programme. It's the thing that the previous Secretary of State was really, really keen on. It's still a key part of ISCF Wave 3, and it goes beyond the industry match towards competition projects. So if you look at the numbers, if we have a grant of 153 million, our target for industry investment is over 200 million. It's not possible that all that industry match can simply come from the amount of grant that we don't pay you for your projects. It has to be something else. So what we're getting at there is if this project is successful and it aligns with your other investment plans, tell us what they are. So an example which we talked about is the fact that if your product is going to be made, it's going to have to be made somehow. So what capital investment will it need actually to move to the next step? What other infrastructure in quantum are you putting alongside this project? So kind of we want you to tell us, and not only do we want us to tell us about it, but we want to tell us how you are going to measure it and how you're going to describe that to us. So we know you don't have a crystal ball, but we are expecting you to kind of tell us, what your plans and ambitions are in quantum and how that industry investment is going to take place in the UK, because that's what we need to see in the UK to match the investment that we've had elsewhere. Resubmissions. You can use a resubmission to apply for this competition. We had quite a lot of projects in Wave 2 which we went out to fund. We are prepared to talk to you, and this is perhaps at this point. Traditionally, when we ran these competitions, we kind of pretty much go into PERDA, as soon as the competition opens, and we don't kind of talk to you very much. We kind of don't do very much. We're not going to write your application for you. We're probably not going to read it for you, but we do want really great projects and really great consortia. I'll talk about the difference between a great project and a great consortia in a minute. But we are prepared to kind of have perhaps a more interactive experience with you and your collaborators than we have in the past. So if you applied for, it's a failure to exploit, if you applied for a previous competition, so if you've got a range of different Innovate UK funding, we will kind of look about how you've used it and how you've used it to grow your business and to grow your investment in the UK. Bluntly, if you've had 15 projects from us over 10 years, you had 3 people then, you've got 3 people now, we would question really what you've done with our money in terms of, we do look at what you said you would do with our money and what your plans were over the last few years. We are going to bear that in mind, so think about it. So we are going to ask you those questions. If you come for an interview, we will ask you those questions as to what you did with the previous 4 projects that you had with us. So think about it. Again, it's also important to evidence the capacity to deliver projects appropriately. There's lots of different skills involved in delivering a project. So if you've got them, then share them with us because, and again, I know that you'll be terribly short of space in terms of your applications, but do tell us what your capacity is to deliver projects and why you think you've got the capacity to run a really big project. A question we had in the workshops running up to this event, a number of people asked us saying, well, we're a brand new spin out. We only just spun out. Are we eligible to lead a £10 million project? And my answer was, well, kind of you are, but if you're a brand new spin, you've probably got other things on your mind than leading a £10 million project. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but tell us why you would be. We ought to be confident in your ability to do that. If you've delivered loads of different projects in the past, then kind of tell us. But clearly, we are slightly sceptical folk, and if we think that there's something a little bit wrong about where you are in your development, then we might well say so. Okay, previous projects. Under terms of our funding, if you're required to put an independent accountant's report, if your organisation or a member of your consortium failed to do that, then we won't allow funding to you. So kind of get all your paperwork up to date, I guess is really what they're saying. Now, okay, then a slightly tricky one, which is IP exploitation. So you should make sure that your participation does not prevent any intellectual property generated by the project from being exploited in the UK. This is code for the fact that many companies have ownerships which lie back into another country. Some of those countries have rules in terms of how IP shared with them can be exploited. I mean, the best example of that is ITAR, where you have IP that's generated and shared with a US company. They can, if they wish to do so, stop that IP from being generated, from being exploited outside the US. So you just need to really think quite carefully. This is quite a high profile topic at the moment, so you need to really give it some thought about the fact that if you're generating IP in the UK and you have a footprint that's elsewhere, say particularly in a country that has strict regulations in terms of export of controlled technologies, of which quantum can or cannot be a controlled technology, then you need to give it some thought. So how you will manage IP in the consortia to do that, you need to think about. And when you say think about, I mean tell us about it. Okay, so an even more delicate issue is that you need to ensure that all your collaborators are eligible to receive funding from Innovate UK. I think our competition team are going to talk a bit more about that a bit later because there's a number of reasons why a company might not be eligible. But the problem is if you have a consortium of 10 companies and one of those companies is not eligible, then the entire consortia can become unfundable. Now, practically there are sometimes ways to get around some of this eligibility issue if you address it in well enough in advance. But means you do need to ask a delicate question with your collaborators as well, whether or not they're aware of what their funding status might be with Innovate UK. So it involves asking sensitive questions. I'm also aware that the person you're talking to might be the technical lead or a project lead rather than the financial lead. They might have to go back and check with their own financial organisation or their CEO about whether or not they comply to some of these rules. Many of this be clear, isn't particularly new. One issue is new, but it is something that we have think about. We don't look at the financials and whether or not your eligibility until after we've awarded. So what is really bad for us is because these are big projects, so we don't want to award a significant chunk of money to a project which then can't go and take the grant up, because really that's money we can't invest in great projects. And the issue that tends to cause us most is whether or not all organisations are eligible to state aid. Again, I think my competition partners are going to talk about this in more detail, but probably the issue that's newest in the area of state aid is a test called undertaking in difficulty. I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but bluntly, there are financial tests about whether or not how much basically working capital your business still has. This isn't eligible, by the way, if the company is less than 3 years old, but it is a test that if you haven't applied for money from us for a couple of years, might not be familiar to you. So do read the paperwork and do check whether or not. So there's often ways in which this will happen. By the way, this isn't specific to this competition. This will be any form of state aid from the UK. Okay, so the last couple of slides from me. Industry leadership. So we've been doing this for a while now, and we know many of you in the audience, as you'll be aware. But we're increasingly experienced at determining if a project is genuinely industry-led and has full industry commitment. So we are aware that sometimes consortia are assembled by an academic group or an RTO, and it looks like a good idea. What we really will be testing whether or not industry is genuinely leading the application and genuinely leading the project. The interview process is especially enlightening. So my general advice is make sure the first time your consortium members meet isn't in the room outside the interview process, because we do have examples where we say, right now, so Bob's going to lead the presentation, and everybody looks around and says, who's Bob? And that's a pretty clear example from us, is that this consortia kind of hasn't really got together and talked about the project very well. So do try and make sure that that it is very clear that this is an industry-led project. We have also, project management companies play a really important role, sometimes in delivering projects, but they do actually, if a project management company has assembled a consortium, it's particularly difficult for them to demonstrate that it's industry-led. That's just an observation from what we had in Wave 2. I guess, and a little bit more than that, is consortia as a high-performance team. We do look at the consortia and think about how it might work well together. Kind of, is everybody in there? Should they be there? Do we think that there are competitive issues that might prevent this from performing well? And that's why the way the consortium works together is really very visible at interview. Visible, we can see the chemistry between people. We can see that you've actually worked together and got compromises in that, and you all understand what your place is. These are quite compressed, they're quite intense projects. And so, the idea that you actually know each other and we think you can work well together in the past is a really important criteria that we had. So kind of get together and work out who's going to do, and you'll come over as the great team we expect you to see. So I think that's most of what I'm going to say right now. Those are my details. We always advise you to use our customer support service. Most of you, I think some of you, will know our personal details, and often you come directly to us. The problem is that we're very, very busy people, and if we either miss your email or it falls bottom of our list, we don't keep a record of that. Customer services do. So if you go through them and we haven't responded to you, they'll nag us until we do. And also our responses are logged. So if kind of later we turn around and say, actually, we said that was eligible, and then we turn around later, then you have some record of what our decisions are. So do use the competitions line if possible. I think that's all I'm going to say now. So Roger, shall we both be available for any questions that you have? Questions, anybody?
I was wondering, at the point of the invitation interviews, how many proposals do you think are moving forward at that point?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, actually. I suppose the strict answer, I think, is all the ones which we view as being above the quality line and our eligible reserve funding. So for those of you who don't know how our system works, we have a quality line. It's typically 70%, isn't always, but we draw a quality line and we look at projects which are effectively high quality or low quality. So last time we interviewed all the projects which were above the quality line. We would aim to do that unless there's so many of them that we can't do that. So typically we kind of try and get at least twice as many people coming forward as grants we're likely to award. And again, that's difficult for us to know because projects can vary quite a lot between 2 million and 10 million in total project size. So, if they all come in as 10 million, then obviously we're only going to fund sort of 3 or 4 projects. So if it comes in as smaller, we can fund a lot more projects. So I think we'll have to see.
And then my second question is, you are essentially asking for a small company about their roadmap, where they're going if they're going to submit, say, one of your larger proposals. Who's going to read these proposals?
So, okay, so I think the word roadmap for me is one of the most overused words because we use it to mean lots and lots of different things. So in particular, we tend to use roadmap to mean what the technical roadmap is, but also what the timing roadmap is. And so it's a very complicated word. So I think the answer to the question is who's going to read them is the assessors are going to read them. We'll cover that in the next session. But all of our applications are rated by 5 assessors. Those assessors will be people who are used to reading quantum applications. They will be technically literate, but perhaps not expert in your particular area of quantum. So your language needs to be sufficiently detailed for someone skilled in the art to differentiate between the different technical parameters you use, but not so full of acronyms and detail that only 4 people in the world can understand what you're talking about. So I think the answer to your question is the assessors will be the first people who read them. So in terms of what we're looking for by roadmap, we're looking for what the commercial roadmap and the technical roadmap might be. So we're really looking to see what are the milestones between the end of your project and actually somebody buying a product or a service. And we want to have an idea of what risks are involved in that too.
Hi there, Rebecca Simmons from River Lane in Cambridge. 2 quick questions. When you talk about quantifying industry investment, should we actually put numbers on it? For example, company X are going to put £3 million of R&D in alongside this project.
Yes, please. Is the answer. And so, you might well they will put 3 million in, and you might well put over the next. Remember, we've got a project which lasts 5.5 years. So we are expecting you to be kind of quite ambitious in what your plans are. One of the things that Roger, when you've referred to the investment accelerator, one of the clear things, so we've done a number of pieces of work looking at where we expect industry investment to come from in quantum. And it was very clear when we did it, a significant amount of that investment is going to come from companies who are pre-revenue. So therefore, they're companies which don't have the money in the bank now. So some of the other ISCF challenges, foundation industries, for example, they are massively post-revenue companies. So when they say they're going to invest 20 million, they've probably already got the 20 million, or it's coming in from an existing product line and a supply chain. We're looking at quite a lot of companies who are going to be investing money which they haven't raised yet. And some of it will be invested by companies which don't exist yet. So that's one of the reasons which underline the investment accelerator, but which is why we expect you to know if your project is successful, if ISCF continues to support you and the rest of the UK infrastructure, where might you go over the next 3 or 4 years, and how might we measure it? Is that a fair answer? I can't really see where the question
I'm over here. Just second question linked to that, actually. So our project is fairly ambitious and will need to run over 6 years. We're aware that the funding is only for 36 months. You mentioned the waves 2 and 3 of funding. can we put in an application saying this is the first phase, we will be looking to apply for a second wave, or is that just a little bit over the top?
So, I mean, one way of putting that is you're really highlighting what your runway is. But, you may not be successful at that point. So are you saying we've wasted all our money if you aren't successful in such phase? So I understand that that's a catch-22. But I think that if you look at the timing, though, there isn't a clear area of clear blue water between when these finishes and when the next one. The nature of the beast is we're going to commit all of our 6 years of money in the first 3 years. Otherwise, it kind of doesn't work. So yeah, we will expect some projects. We do expect that some of the outcomes of the project will be additional projects that we fund. But we also want to know what additional industry funding that's going to generate as well, because we're also aware of double counting issues in terms of how we measure that industry investment.
Chris. Sorry.
Roger.
I don't know if this is on. Is it? Good. Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out on that one of the every competition we get applications from companies who've obviously desperately looking for funding, and someone says, "Have you thought of applying for a grant?" And the whole submission is a bit like they're filling in a form. And the whole submission, as part of a grand plan they have for starting this company. That is not the nature of these grants. So everything has to be articulated as a project of strategic significance. And the clearer you can delineate that project and explain what you're trying to achieve, and then the clearer you can say, and because I've achieved this, it unlocks all these wonderful things, which is actually, we almost need a paragraph from each of the partners. And of course, the stronger stories says we couldn't quite see because of risks or whatever our way to running this project, but if we can run it, all of our businesses take off. So related to the River Lane question on phasing, obviously what we can't do is predict that the next application for money will be successful. So the project will have to be described in a way which says, with this money, we will achieve this. And that's great in its own right. But if we get some more further on, as Chris pointed out, it would be even better. But you've got to allow us to judge these as individual projects with a very clear picture, strategic projects, of what they unlock if they're successful. It's also, this is about innovation and is about risk. It's amazing how many people put in submissions where the word, I would do a search on the word innovate or innovation. Quite a few score 0. So it's very difficult to think of a sentence which says, my project is innovative because, if you don't actually see the word in it. And so it's worth just thinking along the terms of we really do need evidence of the innovation. We need evidence also of risk. It's amazing how many people will write, this is a risky project, we can't see our way to financing it ourselves. But when you see the risk register, it's bright green, with not a risk in sight. So it's, you've got to think project, you've got to think innovative project with an element of risk. You've got to give us reasons for realizing why public money is needed and you can't do it yourselves. And you've got to some extent shape the project to fit, back to this question of phasing, to fit what we're asking. And that includes the technology as well. When Chris talked about the technology, this is quantum too. If you're really clever and can make a case for why you think what you're doing is relevant, we will accept it. If you leave it to us, we might not. So, the whole question here is one of fit. Take your dream, take what you currently want to do, read the competition brief, and unless it really needs a club hammer to knock it into shape, a lot of your ideas, I think, can be honed to match what we're looking for. And it's competitive, and that's why it's important, because we're going to be giving the grants to the programs which are best fit for what we want to achieve with this public money.
I think the risk is is a really good point, actually, Roger, because one of the applications we funded last time actually funded 2 different technical solutions. Something was really important, and I didn't really know what was going to be the right avenue to support it. So they actually put in two different work packages designed at producing different solutions for the same thing, because that was so important to them. And that was kind of quite a clever thing to do, actually, and it's turned out to be a clever thing to do too. Any other questions before we break for a break? At the back?
Hi. A real quick question on the idea of using a subcontractor versus bringing someone in as a collaborator in a consortium. Pros and cons from Innovate UK's point of view on that one. There's certain things that we can think about where maybe the amount of work being done is more appropriate for just getting a subby in rather than bringing someone in.
Okay, so the question is subcontracting. So there are 2 points there. One is one of the things we look at is whether or not a collaborator is really a collaborator or whether or not they're a subcontractor. And the definition of a collaborator is if effectively they make an intellectual contribution and take an intellectual gain from it. So we often do the other way around. We say, well, actually, all you're really doing is buying something from that company. So actually, they're not going to gain anything from it at all, apart from the fact that they've supplied something. We generally don't like subcontracting above a particular level. I'm not sure if there's a specified level, but 20% is usually considered to be. If it's more than 20%, that's too high. For big projects, that level might be significantly lower. So we do expect, if it's a service or a product that you're buying in, it's more appropriate for that person to be a contractor. But equally, we're not as contractors get paid in full. We aren't. It isn't a coach and horses to drive through our degree of funding. So you need to use it appropriately, I suppose, is the answer to the question. Likewise, we do occasionally see the case when if there's a critical component or a critical material, for example, you can only get abroad, we do sometimes see that, but it's not a way of buying in huge amounts of expertise from outside the UK.
Chris, just a very quick one. Pure logistics, are you circulating these slides as a PDF to all delegates?
Yeah, the slides will be available. The recording of the presentations will be put on stream online, as is, by the way, as is the investment accelerator. I think that's already available online, which is a briefing we did last week. Just to be clear, that was purely for investors who wish to operate a fund with it. That won't actually be a fund that's going to be making grants directly to business really for the next several months.
Hi there. Just a kind of follow-on question from the other one about if you had a large project, for instance, and you were saying before that I'm Adam Bond from the University of Sheffield, sorry. If you separated, you want to see a project, so very discrete projects with specific outcomes, and I get all that. If you had one project going into an early phase competition and was successful and was running, and then if you submitted a linked project proposal into one of these later phases, that Drew was going to draw and build on some of the stuff that was being developed in the earlier project, would you view that positively in terms of leverage, in terms of your scoring? So I'm not sure if we officially would say we'd view that positively, but there are 2 points to make. One is, in practice, many of the projects which we've just funded built on previous projects that we've funded. And that for 2 reasons. One is that they were successful. So if you've actually generated something that's successful. The other is you have evidence that the consortium can work together and pass. So although I don't think we'd say, oh yes, we prefer that project because they've delivered something before. But I think our observation, particularly if you come for interview, is you'll work much better if you've previously worked together before. So the idea of it is not uncommon for small projects to then build into large projects as they become more successful. So I think the answer to your question is probably.
Can I just add on that? Yes, the answer is probably not, because we're viewing it favourably. But this business is full of serial offenders who get very good at getting funding, and they get the next lot because they know how the system works, they know how to fill in forms. And if you've got a mature consortium as well, you're well up the curve by that stage. So the answer is not because we view it favourably, but from a consortium which has been successful once in not only bidding for the money but doing the work, are already very, very likely to be very good at proposing something else which is attractive. Okay, they're veterans.
But the only caveat I'd say to that is we perhaps would expect you to put more into the project
as later go on. So, you know, in a way, what we're really looking for is as projects get bigger, we're expecting businesses to scale as well. So we're expecting to not only, so if all the people working on your project from a feasibility are then go on to work in your project to see R&D, kind of say, well, you know, we're really expecting your business to be expanding at this point. So we'd quite like, as this goes through, the proportion of your research funding that you get from us actually to go down and not to go up. So we are looking for you to be raising investment and for you to be investing more in the area as well. And the later projects go along, the more of that investment becomes critical in terms of getting that exploitation to bringing those products to market. So we want to see you have increasingly more input, more investment and more ambition as projects go on. No more questions? Shall we quick break?
Can I just raise a couple of things, Chris?
Okay.
One is we did touch on ability to exploit IP, and we did touch on ITAR. Our real concern is ITAR contamination. So let's give a really practical example. If there is if you are a company based in the US with a UK office, and you're going to bring a component in from the US, that is no problem at all. If you're going to ask for funding for a UK team to integrate that in the UK, that is no problem at all. And strictly speaking, what we're funding is that integration expertise, and we're delighted it stays in the UK, and we can see a forward path for exploitation. If in the process of doing that integration task, which we're funding, you run into some difficulties and you bring in a US colleague who's done a similar bit of integration on a DARPA program, you probably destroyed the ability for that expertise then to be exploited within the UK. That's what we mean about ITAR contamination. So you're going to have to be really, really clever. And of course, if you are a US company with a UK base, you'll normally know about these issues, but you have to be very, very careful that if we're paying for something, because we're funding tasks, then that task is something which we can go and get wider benefit from. And we're very, very happy if integration expertise is built up in the UK. But we would want to see at least some knowledge or evidence of knowledge of the dangers of, if you like, some very, very specific know-how coming across from a related US program, which then damage the ability for that product or that integrated product to be exploited in the UK. That's one issue. Quickly, on the undertakings and difficulty, this is actually, let's be honest, this is just rules. And the reason I say that is we have to be really very specific. It's a rule to make sure that we don't prop up failing companies, which is why that's 3 years rule. Amongst a consortia, you may not know when you put a proposal in whether in fact a company, because businesses go up and down, as to whether there's a risk of one company, one of your partners, not being qualified for taking a grant or for state aid. What I would say is then you better have a contingency plan in place, because we don't work by intent. What we do is when we've blessed a project and it's got through the level of quality and been through the panel, we then do commercial due diligence, and it is the day on which the due diligence is done that questions will be asked to see whether that company can take a grant or not. So it's really, really specific rules on a specific day, and that means there might be an element of uncertainty. So you're going to have to assess for risk, and you're also going to have maybe to think of some contingency plans, so that if in fact one of the partners wasn't capable of taking a grant, there was some other way of doing it. So it is a complicated issue. But it is just, like with a lot of business, it's just following the rules. And we want to be absolutely clear that what we have to do is at that due diligence stage, on whatever date it is, we have to show that we have to convince ourselves that those who are about to get a grant offer letter are allowed to get such letters.
But please don't let either of those two issues, either IP
undertaking the difficulty put you off. But certainly the IP, we have really good examples of companies which do have we are subsidiaries of foreign companies and have managed to put in ways of doing it. So it's not an impossible task. It just needs to be given some very serious thought.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. A quick break and we come back and our competitions people will give you a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melissa Hughes. I'm a portfolio manager at Innovate UK, and I'm going to take you through the competition process, and I'm also joined by my colleague Lydia. So between us, we're going to cover a few things, including a bit of a recap on stuff Chris has already said. He's pinched half my slides, so apologies, there's going to be a bit of repetition. So we'll take you through application finances, submitting your application, project setup, and then we've got a Q&A at the end. So just to recap on bits that Chris has already mentioned. So firstly, at the eligibility criteria. So as you know, we've got two streams. So for feasibility and industrial research projects, you need to be a UK-based business to lead an application, and you need to include at least one UK SME. However, projects can be single or collaborative. For large projects, lead also must be a UK-based SME, must be collaborative and include an SME as well. And then, as always, carry out your work in the UK and exploit the results from or in the UK. Project costs. So for feasibility and industrial research projects, that's up to 500,000. Market research projects must be below 50,000. And for large projects, that's between 2 and 10 million project costs. And then project lengths, 6 to 18 months for the smaller stream. And you need to be in a position to start your project April 2020. And 18 to 36 month project duration for the larger stream, and you must be in a position to start your project on or before June 2020. So this is just a list of the types of organisations that we fund at Innovate UK, and the amount of funding that you can receive will depend on which organisation you fit into. So when you set up an account online, if you haven't already, make sure you're selecting the right organisation for you. So I know Chris has already covered a bit about state aid. So in order to be eligible to receive state aid, you need to pass the undertakings and difficulties test. And this test only applies to limited liability companies that are more than 3 years old. And if you have a parent company, the test can be performed on your parent or holding company. You need to make sure that your business is eligible before you submit an application. And if you are successful in the competition, then we will apply this test as part of our viability checks. And there is much more detailed information around the undertakings and difficulty test on our online guidance. So both streams of the competition are funded under State Aid Article 25. So funding for R&D projects split into the 3 categories, so feasibility studies, industrial research and experimental development. In terms of the participation rules for the competitions, so for the large collaborative projects, at least 70% of total eligible project costs need to be incurred by a business, with the maximum level of 30% of project costs shared by research organisations. However, for the feasibility projects, at least 50% of total eligible costs can be incurred by a business, and then the remaining 50% can be incurred by research organisations. So we mentioned that the streams, especially the large, we need collaborative projects. So at Innovate UK, that means that there needs to be at least 2 organisations claiming grant within the application, including the lead. And there needs to be evidence of a genuine collaboration. So you need to explain within your application how all parties will contribute to the project and benefit from the collaboration. So making more than one application and resubmission. So for feasibility and industrial research, any one business can lead up to 3 applications, but all applicants can partner in any number. For large collaborative projects, academic institutes cannot work or lead alone. However, in exceptional circumstances, an RTO can lead, but you do need to get in contact through CSS beforehand, at least 10 days before the competition closes, to seek approval if you wish to lead. And any one business can lead on just one application, however, you can partner in any number. And if an RTO is approved to lead, then they must collaborate with 2 businesses or more, and at least one of those businesses needs to be an SME. And if you're not the lead, you can collaborate in any number of applications. So in terms of resubmissions, you can resubmit a previous project that you might have used for an Innovate UK competition into either of these competitions. So a resubmission is an application that Innovate UK judges as not materially different from one you've submitted before. It's not considered a resubmission if you have a brand new application, project or idea that you have not previously submitted, or it's a previously unsuccessful or ineligible application. So you have updated it based on assessor feedback, and it is materially different, and it still needs to fit within the scope of the competition. In terms of other Innovate UK projects, so if you have an outstanding final claim and independent accountant report on any Innovate UK project, then you will not be eligible to apply for grant funding as the lead or a partner. And if you have applied to a previous competition as the lead or sole company and were awarded funding, but you did not make substantial effort to exploit the award, then we will award no more funding to you. In terms of dates, so as I'm sure you're all aware, the competition's opened on the 5th of August, and the submission deadline is noon on the dot, 30th of October 2019, and that is for both streams. So interviews are only applicable for the largest stream, and they will begin week commencing the 6th of January 2020. And applicants will be informed for the feasibility and industrial research stage on the 13th of December. And for the large collaborative stream, that will be on the 17th of January 2020. So I'm now going to take you through the Innovation Funding Service, or IFS. So as I mentioned, both the competitions are now live, and you can search for those online. So if you go to the Innovate UK website and click on Search for Funding Opportunities, that will bring up the whole range of competitions that we currently have open. So for those of you that have applied through IFS before, you can just simply log in and start an application. For any of you that are new, you will need to create an account. So if you're a UK-based business, please use Companies House to look up your business, as it speeds up our checks by providing your company number. For research organisations, academics and universities, enter your information manually. So this is to avoid you setting yourself up as a business and to make sure that you receive the correct amount of funding. So in terms of the level of detail that you need to provide within your application, so the first section is project details. So we've got application team. So you need to, you can invite organisations who you are working with on the project, and those are your collaborators. And contributors are colleagues from your own organisation that you can invite in to help answer specific questions. So you need to complete your application details, so give the title, timescale, research category, and please specify if you are including a resubmission. Then we've got the project summary, so you need to give a succinct overview of your project, so this it's clear for the assessors. Then we've got public description, so just be mindful of any confidential information here, as this is what we will use if your project is successful. And then scope, the most important one, so make sure you describe how your project aligns with the scope of the competition, because if it doesn't fit the scope, then it won't go out for assessment. So for those of you that have applied with us before, we are using our 10 standard questions, and I'm not going to go through each of these. However, I do want to draw your attention to questions 6 and 9. So they do have additional points to include within your application. So these include focuses on the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and industry investments. So you can see the questions that we're asking you before you even want to apply, and they're on the How to Apply tab, and that's got everything that's included in each question and what we're looking for you to include. So as always, we've got the optional appendices for questions 2, 3, 7 and 8. Just to reiterate, please make sure that they are within the page limit and make sure they are supporting your answer, not a continuation of your answer. Assessors are told to disregard anything that is over the page limit. So this is the format for answering a question. So you can assign the question to someone else within your project team. You can also click on the online guidance at any point when filling it in. You've got the option to format your content, and then also you've got your word count to check how you're getting on. So each question has the same word count as usual, capped at 400 words, and all questions are equally weighted. So that is everything on the questions. So I'm now going to take you through the application finances. So first up, to claim funding. So your business does not have to be UK registered with Companies House when you apply, but it does need to be registered before you can receive funding. And you are unable to claim funding if you're an overseas organisation, your organisation is set up as a branch, or your company is based in Jersey. So in terms of the costs, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the cost categories, so I am going to briefly just go over those now. So first up, we've got labour. So in this bit, you need to enter the role within the project, the gross annual salary and the number of staff and the number of days that they are spending on the project. If you have multiple people in the same role and that they're on the same salary, you would just put, for example, project manager times 2. Any employees that are part-time, then you should enter their costs as a full-time equivalent. And you can adjust the working days per year from the default of 232 if that's applicable for you. And just to note that dividends, bonuses and non-productive time cannot be included within your labour costs as they are ineligible. And just to stress that when you're making grant claims against labour costs, actual cost claims must be supported with timesheets. Moving on to overheads. So you've got 3 options within IFS. So you can choose to have no overheads, 20% of labour costs, which is probably the easiest option, or you've got the option to calculate overheads, which means that you need to download and fill in the overhead calculation spreadsheet, which is an Excel form, so you need to complete it and then re-upload it as part of your application. So in terms of overheads, Innovate UK's definition is additional costs and operational expenses incurred directly as a result of the project, and these could include additional costs for administrative staff, general IT, rent and utilities. So we've got indirect overheads. So those are costs that are associated with back office functions such as finance and HR, whose primary function is to support the running of the business, and they can only claim a portion of their time, and their work needs to be additional to the delivery of the project, so not BAU. Then we've got direct overheads, so costs associated with staff working directly on the project, such as laptops, desktops, desks, and office facilities. Material costs. So here you need to enter and describe the materials that you are using, the volume and the cost. They need to be project specific. Please provide as much information as possible. Just putting consumables isn't going to quite cut it through our project finance review should you be successful. And here you need to input any items which you would usually depreciate as per your company's policy. However, they should be listed in capital usage, not material cost. And any materials that are supplied by associated companies or subcontracted from another consortium member, these must be listed at cost and do not include any profit element or margin. Capital equipment usage. So you need to describe in this section how you're using the equipment, whether it is new or existing, the new purchase cost, how long you are depreciating it over, and the residual value at the end. And the calculations you use here will need to be in line with your own accounting practices. Subcontractors. So you can use subcontractors within your project team. If the cost, however, is going to be significant, then you will need to justify who, why, and what you need them for, both within the costs and within your answers to your application itself. So it is important that you justify the use of subcontractors within your application, especially if you're using non-UK based subcontractors. And if you use a parent or sister company, then again, please ensure you list at cost and do not include any profit. Moving on to travel and subsistence. So here you need to include things such as any essential meetings that would need to happen during the project. However, you cannot include sales and marketing activity as this is ineligible. And any travel costs incurred need to be at economy travel only. Just to note, you should be prepared to provide a breakdown of these costs in more detail during our project finance review if you are successful. For example, they might require you to split a trip into its subsistence, accommodation and travel components. And then finally, we've got other costs. So here you just include anything that you've not included in any of the other categories, but just ensure that you're not double counting anywhere. So we do have an extensive project finance guide online. So if you're unsure of what sort of costs you can include in here, or if you need any guidance for filling any of the other sections, please do refer to that project finance guidance online. So an example of costs that you could include here, which don't fit previous categories, might be licensing new technologies, patent filing costs for new IP. For SMEs, that's up to $7,500. And then we have the funding rules. So the level of funding awarded will be dependent on the type of organisation and the type of research that you are doing, as previously mentioned. And IFS will advise the maximum grant percentage that you can request based on your answers to when you set up your account. So type and size of organisation and your research category. And then this is just the summary of the funding that is available based on the type of organisation you are. So for the large stream, obviously it covers all three research categories, so technical feasibility, industrial research and experimental. So if you're a business and you're in the smaller stream of feasibility and industrial, that is capped at 70%. If you're a micro or small, 60% if you're medium, and 50% if you're a large. However, experimental development is obviously significantly smaller. So we've got 45%, 35% and 25%. Research organisations, you'll be funded at 100%, universities, so 80% of full economic costs. And public sector organisations or charities will be funded at 100% of eligible costs. So I'm now going to hand over to Lydia, who is going to take you through academic partners, the assessment process and project setup.
Right, so why JES? Academic partners in your consortium will need to complete a JES form, which they should already be familiar with. The form validates costs for us. Innovate UK don't have access to the JES system to extract information ourselves, so this is why it needs to be sent to us. Project costs for your academic partners. When they've completed their JES form, academics will need to include their unique reference number on IFS and input their figures. Please ensure the figures you provide are identical. The form must be with council status and uploaded to IFS as a PDF document. You must also ensure academic partners complete the justification of resources and pathways to impact on the JES form, as this is important information that the assessors look for. Any questions about JES, you can call or email the JES help desk. The contact details are here. So how to submit your application. This is a summary of the project costs available to all organisations in the project. You will not be able to see any more detail or any further breakdown of anyone else's costs. This is what the assessors can see. For collaborative applications, IFS will highlight to the lead applicant any partners who have outstanding project finances to complete. All the finances must be included in the application before the lead applicant can submit. It will also check that your research participation costs are within the required limits. IFS does not validate your project costs. It's your responsibility to ensure all costs are within the eligible total project costs, as stated in the brief and the guidance. This is our track of site usage and submission uploads leading up to the deadline. So the table shows the number of applicants submitting their proposals at each hour leading up to the noon deadline. As you can see, Most people leave it until the very last minute. We recommend you don't do this, just in case there is a technical issue. If you are having any problems, please give us a call as soon as possible so we can work around this, because as you can see, everybody likes to submit at 5 to 12. Okay, so assessment. The application is assessed. This involves a scope check, a review by 5 independent assessors, feedback collation, and an interview. Assessors tell us they want clarity, detail, justification, and to see that the application has presented a viable opportunity for growth with an exciting innovation where public funding will make a real difference to developing their idea, and that they have the right people and the right approach to run a successful project and exploit the results. Answer the questions in the guidance so the assessor can award you the maximum marks. Even if you have a fantastic idea, if you don't answer the questions, you won't score well. So here we have some information about feedback. It's compiled using the written comments of the assessors who review and assess the applications. It is intended to be constructive in nature and to highlight both the strong and weak areas of your application. Please bear in mind, because they are assessed by a number of assessors, you may receive information that appears to be conflicting. This may reflect different interpretations of the proposal. It must be noted some proposals may appear to have been favourably assessed based on their comments. In such instances, it could be your proposal simply fell below the funding threshold and others achieved a higher merit score overall. Scoring. So we review scores and feedback to check that the assessors are adhering to our guidelines and that they are scoring fairly. In some cases, we feel a score is unjust and not supported by feedback, and we might remove that score as an outlier and update the total score for the application. Please be aware we can remove both low and high outliers, and scores may increase or decrease. So this is an excerpt from our sheet that's created once we've got all the assessments in. So you can see the column shows a score for a particular application. The highlighted column shows the score spread. This is the difference between the top and the bottom scores. The next 2 columns let us know whether an application has been marked out of scope or whether it's not been recommended for funding. If there's a 3 or more in either of these columns, we will review the scores, we will review the feedback, and decide whether it is justified. So we will check, if they say it's not recommended, that there is a good reason for that. Here, the green box highlights a particular assessor's score across the application. The purple box is all of the assessor's score for a single question. We would look for a total score difference of 20 or more from the highest or lowest to class this as an outlier. Again, we would look at all of the feedback and make sure that the scores are justified. Sometimes an assessor sees something no one else does, or sometimes one assessor doesn't see something everyone else does. So we will look through the feedback and make sure it's valid. If it is an outlier, we will remove it and the score will be updated. The lead will be notified when your feedback's available. They can go onto their IFS dashboard to view the feedback. So if you are not sure, it will be the lead who is informed, and only the lead. So interviews for large collaborative projects. If you are invited to progress to the interview, you can bring up to 9 people to attend. You will have 30 minutes to present, and you'll have up to 30 slides, no videos nor embedded links here. There will then be a 30-minute question and answer session led by the interview panel. You'll have an opportunity to respond to the original assessor feedback, and the panel will see this before interview, so they will be familiar with your application and your response to the feedback. All of the presenters' names, the presentations, and the response to feedback need to be provided to us before the interviews so the panel can be familiar with them. So the process for project setup for successful applicants. These are the project setup stages that need to be completed by all partners within 30 days. You can start project setup as soon as you've been notified that you're successful. Projects should start within 90 days. We no longer issue a conditional offer letter after notification, as organisations are signing up to our terms and conditions when submitting the application. The lead has visibility of the progress of all partners and has responsibility of pushing them through. The lead will need to provide a collaboration agreement and exploitation plan. Each partner should provide their bank details and a finance contact. We will assign you a monitoring officer who will be your main point of contact throughout the project. We will also review your finances to check your costs are eligible and businesses involved are legal entities and meet their match funding requirements. Communication at each stage will be through IFS. If there are any issues, please ensure all details are correct, up to date and regularly monitored. If your contact changes, the email address changes, the phone number changes, please update this on IFS, as this is how we get in contact with you. You cannot make a change to your project before the project starts. If you need to change a partner or move costs around, the funding would be withdrawn. You'd need to reapply into a future competition. Project setup. All grant claiming project partners will be required to complete project setup. You should consider who will be your project manager, who will be the finance contact for each consortium member, and how will your consortium be set up if it's applicable. You will need to create a collaboration agreement. We frequently see projects get held up by the collaboration agreement, so start thinking about this now. You will not be able to make your first claim without it, and it could hold your project up. You have to think about who's in your consortium, what are the aims, how is the work divided up, ownership of IPR, and the management of the consortium. Grant claims and payments. If you're successful and start your project with grant funding, you need to be aware of the fact we pay your claims quarterly in arrears. If you're a small organisation, be wise to manage your cash flow. It can cause small companies problems because they can incur significant costs up front. The pattern of claim payments can impact on cash flow as it's paid quarterly in arrears. Another thing to bear in mind is that all costs have to be incurred and paid between the start and end date of the project. You cannot claim for costs before the project has received confirmation to start or after it has finished. Project change requests. We are unable to process any of these before the grant offer letter is issued. Significant changes count as partner dropouts. If a member of your collaboration has failed UID, you will be advised to withdraw and apply in the next round. So these are our contact details. Our customer support service has a phone number and email address, the Knowledge Transfer Network, and Innovate UK. So now we would like any questions.
Hello, I have a financial question about the claims. If you have an invoice dated the last day of the project with the terms of 60 days or in the quarters, does it need to be actually paid or it's enough to get into the system?
I don't think it has to be costs have to be paid out to claim that.
Look at me.
I'm sorry, I don't think any of us actually know the answer to that one. So I think that's one that's probably going to have to be put in writing to our customer support team, and then that will be directed to the claims or our project finance team. We'll get back to you.
Thank you.
We say claims are incurred and paid with invoices.
Hi, Adam Bond from University of Sheffield. Again, apologies taking the mic a second time. Yeah, I noticed what you said there about if one of your partner organisations drops out, so if you can hear me or not, you might have to reapply for future competition. In other competitions run by BEIS, which is not an UK competition, I've been involved in projects where one of the organisations has decided, I don't want to be involved anymore, and there's another equally capable organisation that we're aware of that we've brought in and we've swapped them round, and it's been accepted by BEIS. Are you saying that's not open if, for any reason down the line, one of the consortium members or pre-award turns on and says, I don't want to do this anymore, but there's another organisation? Are you not saying you allow that?
So as a general rule of thumb, we are moving away from accepting project change requests before a project has started. Obviously, your application has been assessed on the information you've provided, and that includes the consortium members. So if that is changing, it could, even though you're saying that they have the same skills and all that sort of stuff, it is a change to the project as it was assessed. So on that basis, as with any request to change a project before it started, you would need to get in contact with us to see if there is any possibility of pushing it through with an amendment. But it's kind of the hard and fast rule at the moment is the project needs to be as it was submitted. So, but it would be reviewed and it would be up to the innovation lead and the challenge director to approve or deny that request.
I would say in quantum, with the nature of the ecosystem we've got and the newness of the companies, I challenge you to be able to swap out one partner for one of equal capability and skill. It's just not credible in this field.
I think we've fulfilled everybody's needs, haven't we? Is that a hum of satisfaction and comprehension, omniscience around the room? If it is, then I'll thank everybody for coming. There are some one-to-one slots. I think quite a lot have been booked. If you want to talk to us about projects, things in particular, get us in touch. We are prepared to talk to you and your consortia between now and the closure dates in more detail. As I say, if we do so, my advice is always to have your one-pager ready, because we will ask you for it. So if you've got it ready, then that makes our life a lot easier. So if there's no other questions, I'll thank everybody for coming, and good luck with your applications.